Welcome to the Deep Dive. We delve into complex stories, pull out the crucial details, and basically give you a shortcut to understanding what really matters. Today, we're tackling one of the 20th century's most chilling, most stubborn mysteries: the Dyatlov Pass incident. This isn't fiction. It's a true, deeply unsettling story about 9 young, very experienced hikers who vanished in Russia's remote Ural Mountains back in 1959, what investigators found later. Well, it's defied logical explanation for more than 60 years now. It left this trail of bizarre facts, unanswered questions. So our mission today is to really unpack the sources we have, piece together the discoveries, which are chilling, frankly, and look at the theories that still baffle everyone, from experts to armchair detectives. It's compelling, trying to figure out how a group that prepared could just disappear, and what really happened on that desolate mountain.
Right. And my goal here is to help guide you through the evidence, the raw facts, to help you understand the profound contradictions, the perplexing details that make this case just so enduring. We'll really analyze why the facts seem to resist any simple explanation, why they keep pushing us to question everything we think we know about survival, and maybe about the unknown.
Okay, so the stage for this extraordinary and ultimately tragic expedition, it was set in January 1959. Try to picture this. A group of 9 experienced hikers. They're students, recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. And they're setting out on this really ambitious skiing expedition deep into the formidable Ural Mountains. They were young, strong, full of life, but also crucially seasoned in tough winter treks. These weren't novices taking foolish risks. They had considerable expertise.
Yeah, that collective experience is such a critical point. This wasn't some reckless trip by amateurs, not at all. They had the skills, the physical conditioning, the meticulous preparation you'd need for those kinds of harsh conditions. Their training, their previous expeditions, it makes their disappearance highly anomalous right from the start. It immediately suggests something far beyond the usual dangers you face in the wilderness.
Exactly. And leading this team was Igor Dyatlov. He was 23, an engineering student, known for being a decisive leader, disciplined, careful, almost obsessive in his planning. Their goal was Mount Otorten, a peak deep in the icy heart of the Urals. And for much of their journey, the group kept a journal, they took photographs. It gives us this intimate, almost voyeuristic glimpse into their final days. These records show them in good spirits, confidently moving along, completely unaware of the horror waiting for them.
And what's truly unsettling about that initial part of the journey is how well documented it was.
Yeah.
You see the photos, their camaraderie, the beauty of the landscape. The journal gives a timeline. This level of detail coming directly from the hikers themselves, it just heightens the contrast with what happens next. The abrupt, total silence. For a group like this, in those conditions, to just go silent, it meant something catastrophic had happened, something they had absolutely no time or ability to record.
Catastrophic it was. When the group didn't return by their expected date, naturally, alarm bells went off. Search and rescue teams were sent out immediately. What they eventually found would haunt investigators for decades. The first shocking discovery: the group's tent, found half buried in snow on the side of this desolate mountain slope. But its condition was, utterly bizarre. It had been slashed open. From the inside, it's just this desperate, immediate need to get out. And chillingly, their boots, their warm outer clothes, a lot of their vital gear was still inside the tent. It just begs the question, what on earth could compel anyone to flee like that, so desperately, into sub-zero temperatures, abandoning their very means of survival?
That is crucial here. Experienced hikers, especially in that kind of extreme cold, they would never abandon their shelter and wool clothing unless there was an immediate, overwhelming, terrifying reason. The fact it was slashed from inside, not unzipped, points to a frantic, split-second decision. Escape something at the tent, or maybe even in it. It prioritized immediate flight over any kind of preparedness. It's an act of extreme, desperate survival, not, a planned evacuation.
And leading away from that shredded tent out into the bone-chilling wilderness, investigators found barefoot tracks in the deep snow. Barefoot. Can you even imagine the sheer terror that implies? The first bodies discovered only amplified the horror. 2 hikers were found near a lone cedar tree dressed only in their underwear, frozen solid. 3 more bodies were found scattered between that tree and the tent, suggesting this frantic, desperate, and ultimately failed attempt to get back to their only shelter.
Right, and this sequence just compounds the mystery immediately. Why were they so sparsely clothed in that kind of extreme cold? Their positioning, especially that desperate, failed attempt to return to the tent, it suggests an initial flight, driven by sheer terror, perhaps followed by a moment of, well, maybe clarity or maybe just hypothermia-induced confusion where they tried to regain safety. So the question becomes not just what drove them out, but what stopped them from reaching that life-saving shelter just a short distance away.
The horror deepened significantly about 2 months later. The remaining 4 bodies were finally found, buried under nearly 4 meters, that's over 13 feet of snow, in a ravine nearby. And the details of their injuries, they were truly terrifying. One female hiker, Ludmila Dubina, her tongue was missing. Another male hiker, Semyon Zolotaryov, his eyes were gone. But perhaps the most chilling detail, the most baffling, 2 of the hikers had sustained massive internal injuries. Injuries described like they'd been hit by a car. Yet their skin was completely untouched, no bruising, no external bleeding, just shattered bones inside.
That is the true forensic anomaly here. It's what makes this case stand apart. In almost all cases of severe blunt force trauma enough to break ribs, shatter a skull like one of them had, you'd expect significant external signs. Contusions, cuts, obvious impact points, the complete absence of any external marks, despite that catastrophic internal destruction, it suggests a highly unusual, almost impossible mechanism of injury. And then you add the missing eyes and tongue. These defy any conventional explanation, whether it's accident, animal attack. It pushes the boundaries of what we understand about post-mortem changes or even violent acts.
So given these completely baffling discoveries, it's really no surprise that theories have just swirled for decades trying to make sense of what happened on that mountain. But as we'll see, none of them seem to fully explain the whole picture. For a long time, the most common explanation floated was an avalanche. This is a classic winter mountain hazard, right? Makes sense initially.
An avalanche is a natural first thought, absolutely, given the environment. But the evidence from the scene immediately raised serious problems with that theory. The slope where the tent was pitched. It was simply too shallow, less than 30 degrees. Not really steep enough to generate a major, catastrophic slab avalanche. And more crucially, the victim-specific injuries, particularly that massive internal trauma without external bruising. That just doesn't match typical avalanche trauma. Avalanche victims usually have broken limbs, yes, but also surface abrasions, crushing injuries from snow and debris. Plus, an avalanche powerful enough to cause those injuries likely would have completely buried or crushed the tent, not left it standing, but slashed open from the inside.
Okay, so if it probably wasn't an avalanche, what else? Another theory, an intriguing one that's persisted, especially given the Cold War context, is secret military testing. There were reports from local indigenous people, the Mansi and others in the area, about seeing strange glowing lights or spheres in the sky around that night. This fueled immediate speculation. Was some kind of Soviet weapon being tested in that remote region? Could that explain it?
Those reports of glowing spheres definitely add that layer of Cold War intrigue, yeah. And given the Soviet government's secrecy back then, the theory gained a lot of traction. It points towards a powerful, external, maybe man-made force. But even if we assume some kind of military testing occurred, it still doesn't fully account for the unique injury patterns. Why the severe internal trauma with no external marks? Why the selective mutilations, the missing tongue and eyes? While a weapon test, maybe a concussive blast, might explain an initial fright or even some kind of impact, the very specific forensic findings remain difficult to explain just by saying military test.
Then there's a more scientific, though still pretty speculative theory, infrasound. The idea here is that low-frequency sound waves, vibrations below human hearing, may be generated by wind patterns interacting with the mountain terrain, a Kármán vortex street effect. Some propose could have induced panic.
Exactly. Imagine feeling this deep, unsettling rumble, like from a distant explosion, but you can't hear it, you can't place it. Infrasound, though unheard, is known to potentially cause really profound psychological and physical effects. Nausea, intense anxiety, disorientation, even a deep sense of dread or panic. So such a phenomenon could, theoretically, trigger an irrational, desperate flight from the tent. That part fits, maybe. However, while it might explain the initial panic and fleeing into the cold, it completely fails to account for the horrific, specific internal injuries found on some hikers later, or the missing organs. It leaves these huge gaps in explaining the unique combination of evidence.
And of course, with a mystery this deep, this unsettling, the paranormal often makes an appearance in the theories. The local Mansi people who've lived in that region for centuries, they called the mountain Kholat Syakhl, which translates chillingly to Dead Mountain, long before this incident. Was that some kind of ancient warning, or just a deeply unsettling coincidence? Was there something else at play out there?
The local lore certainly adds to the atmosphere, the tension of the story. It taps into our primal fear of the unknown, definitely. But while it underscores this profound sense of unease tied to the location, scientifically, it offers no tangible explanation for the very specific, very bizarre physical evidence found. The fact that people even turn to such theories, I think, highlights just how baffling and deeply unsettling the physical evidence truly is. It resists any easy, rational explanation. So when you look at all these main theories, avalanche, military, infrasound, paranormal, none of them, not one, fully explains that whole combination. The slashed tent, the barefoot tracks, the specific internal injuries without external signs, and those missing organs. Every theory leaves significant, glaring questions unanswered.
Which brings us to the original, official conclusion from the Soviet authorities who investigated back in 1959. Their verdict was chillingly vague. They attributed the deaths to an unknown compelling force.
That phrase, an unknown compelling force, it really encapsulates the whole enduring enigma, doesn't it? It's essentially an admission of bafflement from the very authorities who are supposed to find answers. It leaves the door wide open to almost any interpretation, or perhaps none at all. It indicates they simply couldn't fit the evidence, which was overwhelming in its strangeness, into any known box, natural disaster, accident, or even a standard criminal act known at the time. It's a testament to how perplexing the evidence was, even then.
And as if the events themselves weren't mysterious enough, there's the photographic evidence and how the case was handled afterwards. The hikers, as we mentioned, took many photos, mostly cheerful, casual shots capturing their journey, their spirit. You see them smiling, full of life, totally unaware. But then there's the final controversial image. It's blurry, dark. It appears to capture some kind of indistinct figure, maybe among the trees, on one of the very last frames recovered from their cameras.
That photograph is incredibly haunting, precisely because it's so ambiguous. Is it just, a trick of light, a shadow in the dim, snowy woods, film defect? Or is it, as some people believe, a fleeting glimpse of, well, the last thing they ever saw? The conflicting interpretations around this single blurry photo perfectly mirror the whole mystery. It's this tantalizing hint of something unexplained, but it's utterly unprovable. It just leaves us projecting our own fears and theories onto it.
The actions of the Soviet government following the discoveries only deepened the suspicion and the secrecy surrounding the whole thing. They closed the case remarkably quickly, and alarmingly, the investigation files were sealed, classified. Families of the victims were reportedly told very little. Some say they were pressured into silence. This just added another layer of intrigue and fueled decades of conspiracy theories. Why the rush to close it? Why the secrecy?
That swift closure and the sealing of the files, that's incredibly significant. Government secrecy, particularly in the Soviet era, inevitably breeds distrust. And in a case as bizarre as Dyatlov Pass, it just amplified the public's lasting doubt. It strongly suggests that maybe the authorities either couldn't or perhaps wouldn't fully explain what they found. Maybe they preferred to suppress the information rather than admit to a completely unsolved, deeply disturbing mystery. Or perhaps something even more sensitive they didn't want public.
Okay, now fast forward decades to 2019. Over 60 years after the event, the Russian government, the successor state, actually reopened the case, a new investigation. And their conclusion this time, they stated it was, indeed, an avalanche, specifically a delayed slab avalanche.
Right. And what's truly fascinating here is the continued resistance to that single explanation, even after all this time and a formal reopening. Despite this new official verdict from the Russian government, citing complex snow dynamics, many researchers, some original investigators still alive, and certainly the public, they still find the avalanche explanation profoundly inadequate. It still struggles to convincingly address those very specific, very bizarre internal injuries without external marks, the tent being slashed from the inside, or the full sequence of events that the evidence suggests. For many, the unsettling truth of what happened at Dyatlov Pass remains buried, not just under snow, but under layers of secrecy, unanswered questions, and enduring doubt.
So what truly happened that night at Dyatlov Pass? It remains one of the world's most enduring, most perplexing cold cases.
The silence hangs heavy over Kalachakal, Dead Mountain. 9 lives tragically cut short. No one ever truly held responsible because we don't even know what happened. No fully fitting natural explanation accounts for all the evidence. You have the tent, slashed from within, abandoned in terror, the barefoot tracks in sub-zero snow. And those truly bizarre injuries, the missing eyes, the missing tongue, the massive internal trauma with no external signs, it leaves us with this profound, unsettling void.
And questions that just continue to echo through those frozen trees. So here's something to consider. In our world, with ever-increasing data, satellites, scientific understanding,
Why do some mysteries, like Dyatlov Pass, persist for decades? Why do they defy every logical explanation we try to throw at them, leaving us with far more questions than answers? What does that continued enigma tell us about the limits of our knowledge? Or maybe, just maybe, about the unsettling depths of the unknown that still exist even in our meticulously mapped world?